JavaScript is really just a programming language that'll give you all of the basic constructs you need in order to be able to declare variables, make intelligent statements, control flow, and ultimately run a program. All of the little details that we work with that are generally associated with JavaScript often aren't actually part of it. Most of them come from the browser, the web browser. And the biggest one of those is the document object. This is the object that we get when we type document, like right here. This is the representation of the web page. It contains all of the information that was present in the HTML and in the CSS. It allows us to extract what is already there, but it also allows us to modify it. And it allows us to do all of this dynamically as the web browser continues to run and be viewed by the user. Dynamic web pages are generally created using JavaScript. You can do some simple dynamic stuff using CSS, as we saw with the tooltips, but most of it is usually done with JavaScript. To do this, we have to have a good understanding of the DOM, the Document Object Model. I've pulled up over here W3 School's full reference for the DOM and DOM nodes. The DOM itself is actually a tree. And at every branch of the tree, we would have something called a node. The node are basically the tags of your elements. Now, it's actually a little more complicated than that. There can also be the content between the open and closed tag. That's called a text node. And there could be other simple kinds of nodes that we really don't need to get into in order to understand it. But conceptually, every HTML tag that you create on the page is going to have a node in the DOM tree. Here, we're pulling out one specific node. It's an element node that aligns with the tag that has the ID main content. And we already know from previous examples that this is a div tag that sits right in our main section. It makes it easy to put information right there. Now, in order to be able to work with this, we need to know what document can do. And we've really only seen two things so far. We've seen getElementById, and we've seen document.write. Now, that I've shown you document.write, please never use it again. It's only there as a crutch, and most of the time you don't need it. GetElementById is certainly okay to keep using, and I would encourage that. But I'd also encourage you to take a look through this full reference and see what's there. Some of these things will make sense, and some of them won't, and that's okay. Let me point out the ones that are the most important. You might notice here, there's document.body, and that allows you to get the main body of the document. Some other things that we've seen already, there's document.getElementById. This returns the element with that ID, or as we've already seen, can also return null if it doesn't find it. There's a few other ways to get elements that you might be interested in here. First of all, there's getElementsByClassName. Here you would pass in a class name, but notice it says getElements with an S. This is going to return a list of nodes, essentially an array of nodes. Now that there may only be one of them, and you can go in and grab the first one, and then you'll be able to modify it. But because classes are not unique like IDs are, there's always the chance you'll get more than one, so it always returns an array. Same thing is possible if you get them by name. We saw you can use names with forms, but you can also use them in general. Just give a name attribute to a tag and set it to anything you want. Names also do not have to be unique, and so you can look them up that way. Lastly, you can get them by tag name. That should make sense. The tag name, for instance, is the actual name you use when you create the tag. So for instance, if I wanted to get all the divs, I could simply say getElementsByTagName and pass it div. And that would allow me to modify them all. It's going to return the full array of every div tag that exists in this page, which in this case would just be two. The main container, and then our main content here. Those may or may not be useful, but you'll find 99% of the time this is the one you want, getElementById. There are some other useful things in here. One of the most useful ones, which we're going to learn about now, allows you to create new things. Now, we've already been creating new tags in a sort of cheating kind of way. You'll notice here document.createElement. This allows us to create a tag without actually writing the HTML for it. Let's see if we can do that here to make our hello world not have HTML embedded in the middle of it. Again, we'd like to have separation of concepts. Keep the HTML in one file, CSS in one file, JavaScript in another. And here we see HTML sneaking in. We've got a tag here. We can avoid this if we use this new function, create element, right here. I can say document.createElement, and the element I want to create is a P element. Capital versus lowercase does not matter here, and generally all tags like to be lowercase, so I usually create it with lowercase. Now this is going to create the element, and just like getElementById, it returns it back to us, and we need to store it. I'm going to call this new P tag. So I store it in a variable like that. Now I need to actually put something inside that. There's two different ways I could do it. I could use the old that we've already seen, .inner HTML. But this time, it doesn't actually have anything other than text in it, so we should just say hello world. And we don't put the P in there because we already created the P tag. Fix that there, I misspelled it. So this creates the P tag, and it's basically equivalent to what we had before. Let's see what we get now. I have the page loaded up over here. If we save this, well, all of a sudden now, hello world has disappeared. It's important to recognize that when you call create element, you are creating that element, but you aren't putting it into the page. You haven't attached it to the DOM. And so the last thing we need to do is that. To do this, we need one more function. We would say content, remember content is the div tag that we got up here, .append child. This says take the following tag and make it your child, and we'll give it new P tag. This might seem like a lot of work to avoid HTML, but you'll also find that it is much more efficient. If you put it in the HTML, under the hood, JavaScript is going to essentially do all of this exact work for you, but it's not going to do it as efficiently as if you wrote it out yourself. Now that we've appended it as a child of main content, it shows up again just like it should. We can in fact go one step further with this. Each one of these is actually a node. New P tag is an element node, and most of the nodes we work with will be element nodes, but we could also make the text into an element node. So we could say var new text equals document dot create text. Let's come back over here and we can take a look at this. And it's actually, create text node. And then we can put hello world inside that. This is now a raw text node, and all we want to do is append that node as a child of new P tag. And now instead of the string being assigned to inner HTML, we append the child new text. Come back to our main page, save it. We need to save it over here, back in Atom. And there you go, you can see it's still happening. Let's say hello JavaScript world, just to convince ourselves that this is actually happening the way we expect. As usual, I always like to have the browser up with the developer tools so we can see that it really did build what we expect. So here inside of main content, we now have a P tag, and inside that is just the text, hello JavaScript world. We can shorten this ever so slightly. We don't necessarily need to have all these variables in here since we're just going to use them right away. So I could take this and put it directly inside of append child. That just really takes the variable out of the equation. Now, if you find that confusing, you don't have to do that. It just shortens things a little bit. When lines start to get this long, I often like to break them onto 2 lines, just so that I can see more clearly exactly what's going on. So I'm taking my P tag, appending the child document.createTextNode hello JavaScript world to it. So it appends a text node into the p tag, and then finally appends that to the content. By doing this, we have avoided inner HTML. Now, I'm not going to force you to avoid inner HTML in this class. You can see it's actually a lot of work to avoid it, but it is best practice because inner HTML is inefficient, even for little things like when we assigned the inner HTML to hello world of the p tag. So the more you can work to avoid that, the better. Underneath the hood, every time you assign to inner HTML, the browser has to parse that and render it just like any web page. And the HTML can actually be fairly difficult to render. So it's much more efficient to use create element and append child to achieve what you want. And then create text node whenever you need to just add some plain text into a tag like a p tag. Let's see how we can use what we just learned in order to create a table in a little more efficient of a way. Tables involve a lot of different tags, and managing all those tags can get to be a little bit maddening sometimes. What I often like to do when I have to deal with a table inside of JavaScript is to first come over to the HTML and get the basic skeleton of that table set up. I've got Bootstrap at my disposal, so I'm absolutely going to style it. Table, and then table striped. And then we need a t-head, because we should always have a t-head, and we need a t-body. But beyond that, I'm going to leave them empty. Let me fix that there. There we go. I'm not going to go any further. I'm not going to put any rows either in the head or in the body. Why is that? I'm going to use JavaScript to do that, because I can do it a little more efficiently over there. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of data over on the JavaScript side and see if we can visualize it using a table. So I'm going to save this. If we come over here, you'll notice there's a little bit of space here, but nothing really shows up because the table itself is empty. Now over here on the JavaScript side, I want to be able to get a reference to that table. Now, just like before, in order to do that, it has to have an ID. So I'm going to say my table. Now, of course, you could have used one of those other functions, get elements by tag name, get elements by class, and you'd be able to get them that way. But let's just keep it simple and always get them by ID. So let's grab the element for our table. So var my table is going to equal document.get element by ID my table. You just want to double check, make sure that that ID actually matches the one you gave it. And it does, my table. You can even do a little copy pasta just to make certain it does. Now, I have an element. It's the same as what I got up here, get element by ID main content, but it's not a div. This one's a table. What can I do with a table element? Well, it turns out they can all do something slightly different. And in order to figure out what they can all do, I highly recommend Googling over into W3 Schools. So for example here, we can say W3 Schools table. But we're going to want to go further than that, or it's just going to give us the HTML tag advice. I want to say table DOM. As soon as I say DOM, it knows I'm talking about JavaScript. And one of the first things it will offer me is the table object. This is what I'm looking for. It will show you some examples about how to get one, how to create one, but then it will talk about what it has. It has a collection called rows. This is an array of all the row elements in it, and t-bodies, which is an array of all the body elements, the t-body elements. It also has many other properties, most of which are deprecated. You'll notice here they're all in red, and because they're all in red, you should generally avoid them, with two exceptions, t-foot and t-head. And we already know what those are. Let's go ahead and do something with that. So we have my table, and according to this over here, we can say .t-head to get the header. So I could say var table header equals that. I then have the ability to do whatever a header can do. Now, what can I do with a t-head element? Well, basically, I could retrieve rows from it, or I could delete rows or insert rows. Let's go ahead and insert a row. To do that, I say table header dot insert row. And again, I retrieve the new row. The new row comes back to me. New, we'll call it header row. From this, I can then add in cells. That's what the different things are that we add onto it. So I can say header row dot insert cell. Now we need to go over here and see how this works. When we call insert row, it inserts an empty row. And then when we call insert cell, it's actually going to insert that cell in a particular location. Same with insert row. Now, usually it inserts it at the first position of a table, but typically we actually want to insert it at the end. You can use the value of -1 to achieve that. So we would say insert row -1, and then it will add it on at the end. If you didn't do that, they would actually show up in reverse order. Same with insert cell. We're going to want to say -1. And then var new cell, excuse me. And then right here, we can say new cell dot, we'll do inner HTML just to keep life simple. And we'll say my new cell. Oh, and I need to do single quotes. It's a bad habit. There we go. If we save all this, now let's go back over here and see what we're getting. There it is, my new cell. Now, one odd thing that happens whenever you insert cell, it actually inserts it as a TD instead of a TH. There is a way to fix this. We can actually go in and instead we say new cell dot outer HTML. And here's where we can say TH, my new cell. If you do outer HTML, then you're allowed to specify the name of the tag itself. Now again, this is inefficient, but for our purposes here, it's a quick way to achieve what we want. And there you go, you can see it's in there. And we could keep adding cells to this and putting more data in as we need. So I could say again, new cell. I'm going to reuse that variable, so I don't need to say var again. And I've inserted a new cell, and I'm going to say, let's say name. And then again, we can say something like ID. And there you go. You see it's starting to build up our table. Let's go ahead and add one more thing here. In order to get, this is the way we add things into the T head. So here we're going to retrieve the header and add a row. And then here we're going to add header cells. Now let's retrieve, I lost my comments. Retrieve the T body. So we'll say var table body. And this one's a little bit different. Let's go back to our table reference. If we come back up to the top here, you'll notice that it has a collection called T bodies. A table can only have one T head or one T foot, but it can have many T bodies. So here we would want to say my table dot T bodies 0. That will grab the very first body out of the array. From here on out, I can treat it the same way I treated a header. So let's add several rows. We'll say var I equals 0, I is less than, equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. The first thing we want to do here is say var, we'll call this new row equals table body dot insert row, and we'll insert it at -1. Now let's loop over that row. So we'll say var j equals 0, j is less than 10, and then we'll say j plus plus. And here we'll say new row dot insert cell. So we've got a nested loop here. That's a little bit weird. Oh, I lost my var. Let's put the var back in. But it should be fairly straightforward. And then for the cell, we need to save it. We'll call this again body cell, and we'll say body cell dot inner HTML equals, and let's just set it equal to I times j. We're building a big times table here. You don't have to do that. You can set it to anything you want, but that way we're at least seeing something from the loop. Now let's see what all appears here as we do this. There we go. You see it goes across zeros, and then we go across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we build up, and eventually all the way out at the very end of it, we have 9 times 9, because they never reach 10. In fact, it might be better, let's start these at 1, have them go all the way to 10, so it really looks like a times table. There we go. And the last one is 10 times 10, aka 100. Now, our header row doesn't actually match the length of all our other ones. That's bad practice. We would want to fix that. But here, we have now built up a table in a much more programmatic way. I'm not necessarily saying this is the best way to do it. They're still perfectly fine to build it up inside of the HTML itself. But sometimes you want to compute them. This just gives us a more advanced way to engage that document object model, trying to use these different elements. The table element has all these extra features like t-head, insert row, insert cell, and you have to be very careful that you know how to use those correctly. This is where the reference of W3 Schools comes in very handy, as well as taking a good close look at all of their examples.